time for us to analyze some of the stories. And of course, joining us now is Mr. Akin Fatoke. He is a chartered accountant, and he will be helping us better understand some of the stories that are making the rounds in the business world today. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Akin Fatoke.
Thank you very much, Madam Momobalanli. Thank you very much, iBrand. And I say good morning.
Good morning to you. All right, let's begin with this story coming from the downstream sector, that's the fuel sector, talking about the NNPC, talking about the amount spent on fuel subsidy and refinery rehabilitation between January-May 2022, saying that it stood at 1.3 trillion naira. What are your thoughts on this? But before you react to that, let me also bring on board Dr. Keke Ebenezers, who is an economist. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ebenezers. All right, I guess he is not on board yet, but we will definitely bring him on board as soon as we're able to set up a connection with him. Mr. Fatoke, over to you now.
What are my thoughts? My thoughts are the thoughts of majority of Nigerians who understand numbers. My thoughts are the thoughts of fellow Nigerians who are accountants, who are financial analysts, who has asked for transparency and accountability from the opaque operations of our national oil companies over the years. My thoughts also border on the fact that perhaps for the very first time in a long time, we had under this present regime published accounts by the NNPC. Kudos, albeit questions upon questions about the numbers and the veracity of the numbers. Finally, even for those who are not lettered, I know that for the past 20 years plus, people talk about the PIA that's crawled for 20 years plus. My experience of working in the oil and gas beyond 20 years will tell you that our hop, skip, and jump has been more than 20 years, crawling, taking 2 steps backwards, and seemingly wanted to take a step forward. My reaction is to say that number that we should take, all things being equal, ceteris paribus from the NNPC, is it an audited number? Let's assume it is audited number. It's been from the management account. I would have loved to see what the audited numbers are. And I will tell you the reason why I am saying so. I am not aware, pardon my ignorance in that respect, I'm not aware that we have our clause on the total production, even from the crude, how we sell, how we import. Yes, I know the NNPC is the sole importer of oil, how we consume and what quantity are we consuming, and then applying the flat rates, cost of landing, cost of storage, cost of transportation, cost of logistics, cost of the inefficient petroleum equalization fund for you to arrive at what you call your subsidy numbers. But notwithstanding, estimatedly, I know they run into trillions. And
so are you suspecting, or are you predicting that perhaps these numbers are even higher than what we see right here? They are saying that within the space of 5 months, January and May, was spent 1.3 trillion naira. But are you saying that the figures could be higher?
Of course, naturally, if I'm not able to put my hands on the econometrics to say, for instance, this is what we consumed, we are the...
All right, Mr. Akin Fatoke, they're talking about this report coming from the NNPC that within 5 months, that's January to May, Nigeria has spent 1.3 trillion naira on fuel subsidy. And of course, this is why a lot of stakeholders have been saying that perhaps it's time to even take off this subsidy totally, so that we can begin to let the market forces play in the price of fuel. Thank you for joining us again, Mr. Fatoke. Okay, now I can't hear you. We'll try to fix that and get back to the conversation. But of course, when you look at the fact that stakeholders have been saying that there is no perfect time to remove subsidy. We know that Nigerians, several times when the government has tried to remove subsidy, Nigerians have always revolted with a lot of protest and all of that. Mr. Akin Fatuke, welcome back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I mean, very simply, I don't want us to speak too much grammar. My believing or not believing is going to be based on numbers, audited. I was just going to make the point that you need to factor. You need to factor the cost of smuggling, how much is smuggling, what is the current consumption that we have. We have numbers that are flying around until this is really audited and cumulated before we believe. But for the purpose of argument, let's even take it. I know that before I left the industry a few years back, we were playing with numbers not too far. And by the time you factor in the exchange rate, you factor in the cost of high cost of doing business, and then you factor in, I don't know how you're going to be able to factor in the almighty corruption, which dovetailed that industry all through the time that I operated, which I think has gotten worse. I think that number is maybe near it. So we call it unaudited numbers.
Okay.
And then, even then, you know very much abundantly, Nigerians also know abundantly that number is horrendous. That number is very, very high. That number is food we are eating and we are passing out without commensurate investment.
So would you join the advocacy for subsidy removal so that we can allow the market forces play?
Abundantly, I have been at the vanguard of removing the subsidy a long time ago, even before things gotten worse. Reason being the fact that we do not have the capacity with the manual intervention that we have in that industry. 1, 2, and that the so-called subsidy, well, I can't say so-called subsidy, it's actually subsidized, it's not getting and reaching the real people that it should be getting to. It gets to you, abundantly, it gets to me. And then we do all the things that we need to do and then leave our SDG goals, 17 of them, including health, education, security.
We know that there are so many factors involved in the total removal of the subsidy, but let's not dwell too much on that because there are other stories. For instance, this story about the federal government planning to clamp down on filling stations that sell above 165 naira pump price for PMS. What are your thoughts on this, considering the fact that the oil marketers have said that it isn't sustainable to continue to sell at that price, looking at the price and all of the costs they incur in getting the commodity to their filling stations?
I was smiling. What do I think? I think about it or what I went through, and as usual, Nigeria.
It's breaking off, quite difficult to hear you. But of course, the federal government is now saying that if any filling station sells above the benchmark of 165 naira, they would be shut down. But what are the factors that should be put in place or the factors that should be considered before taking this action? Because this oil marketers had complained earlier, especially with the hike in the price of diesel. Mr. Fatuke, welcome back.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I was making the point that this is something I went through nearly every year in my close to 30 years of working in the downstream of the ExxonMobil, and I know this is another merry-man going thing that you cannot, you cannot measure, and you will not be able to measure. What has happened is that in the first place, the downstream and the mainstream operators, Ahmed knows that very well, and I'm calling his name out, and he can go back and check his predecessors. How successful have they been in there? What this has just done is to create an arbitrage, create another set of delegates, politically speaking, to make a lot of money. How many of the stations are you going to pursue? And how genuine, even if you line up all the policemen that we have that are spread thin under our comatose security system, who is going to pursue what? These guys are going to open late at night, they will sell. And you will always see people at the roadside taking some of these things and selling. So who is fooling who? Now, the point is simple. You cannot, there is no way you'll be able to enforce that. You go to Abuja, of course, you come to Lagos and do a lot of saburato, just make a lot of noise. NTA and some news mediums will come, publish it for 1 or 2 days. Before you know what is happening, a lot of other things are going on at the table. I don't think it's sustainable. I think we need to go take the problem and resolve it at the roots. If we can get, appropriate pricing for these petroleum products,
all right,
you don't need anybody to be monitoring you around. I see a situation where some people.
Okay, some network glitch there, but of course that is one issue to be considered, especially if the federal government wants to retain it at that benchmark of 165 naira. But we would be touching on other stories as soon as we get Mr. Fatoke back on board, especially this one coming from the CBN, saying that they would be they're looking at the forex regime, saying that it is a way to keep the naira or to stabilize the naira. Would be getting Mr. Fatoke's thoughts on that. But of course, these are some of the issues trending in the business world. Looking at we just talked about the fuel price, the fact that subsidy paid on fuel is at 1.3 trillion naira for the past 5 months. And that's coming from the NNPC. And then also we touched, Mr. Fatoke just analyzed the story about Mr. Fatoke just reacted to the story coming from the downstream sector, also talking about the federal government planning to shut down filling stations that sell above 165 naira. Mr. Fatoke, welcome back.
Thank you very much. So let's just end it by saying that the refineries on ending turnaround maintenance, you and I know, Nigerians know, pumping multi-billion dollars and not producing virtually anything. So corruption still continues to be the bane. We know what to do. Right. We know what to do.
Let's move on quickly, Mr. Fatoke, for the want of time. Let's talk about this story coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria, saying that that's coming from Godwin Emefiele, the CBN governor, that objectives of the country's exchange rate policy were to preserve the value of the domestic currency and maintain a favorable external reserves position. He also talked about the fact that the foreign exchange regime is tailored to ensuring external balance without compromising the need for internal balance and the overall goal of macroeconomic stability. I'd like to get your reactions to this story.
My reaction is simple. My economics 101 on finance and banking tells me that when you continue to consume at the rates, at the velocity of which we are consuming in the country, therefore needing a lot of foreign exchange outflow, even to buy toothpicks, even to buy, luxury goods and gifting goods, you have no choice but to continue to just run the way we are running. The fundamentals are just not on. We have an economy that is underperforming. We have a revenue base that is highly, highly geared. Our loan portfolio is so high, and whatever revenue that we are making, we are using to repay debts, pay salaries, and then, fund part of the corruption that we are talking about now. Yes, of course, we have the global economic and financial crisis. We had the pandemic. We had the currency crisis. We had the commodity supply. And, of course, geopolitical tensions all over. You know what I'm talking about, the Russian-Ukraine crisis. But that is also a constant with others. It's also a constant with Ghana. It's also a constant with Rwanda. What has happened in those other places is that they have allowed free flow. Now, Godwin Emefiele, the revived central bank governors, talk about the free float regime where they have to intervene at appropriate times because according to him and according to us, we know that we are not producing. If you are not producing, no magic that you want to you want to conjure. All right. Your population is rising.
All right, before we wrap up, let's get Dr. Keke Ebenezers on board. Dr. Keke Ebenezers, welcome on board.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Now, let me get your thoughts on this story coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria saying that their forex regime is aimed at stabilizing the naira. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so, the federal government in its usual sense, I've always been saying that if you want to regulate inflation and the value of money, you have to get involved in making policies that regulate the supply of money, in which foreign exchange is playing one of the major roles. But then, if you are comparing fixed and floating exchange rate system, the floating is always better. Floating is a situation where you allow the forces of demand and supply to dictate the supply of money in the economy. And then fixed is a situation where the government had to get involved and then, interfering with the forces of the market, the demand and supply of foreign exchange. So, like I've said, I've always been saying it. Yes, the argument of the federal government had always been that arena is a conduit pipe for illicit fund, and so therefore they need to be aggressive about their policy, and they are now trying to protect the fact that coming up with this policy at this time will help them to protect the value of naira. Yes, that is correct in one way, but at every time you are making a policy, you have to look at the side effects.
Okay.
So if the government wants to be sincere, they have to consider the fact that as much as they are making foreign exchange policies to protect the value of currency, the side effect is also cushioned by other policies. So I've always been of the opinion that don't make any policy in isolation. Okay. Let there be 3, 4, 5 policies operating at the same time so that the effect of one policy will be taken care of by another policy. That's my take on that.
All right, let's wrap this up now by looking at this final story coming from the business page, talking about the NCC, that's the Nigeria Communications Commission, saying that tariff increase would raise telco's voice revenue to 1.5 trillion naira. And they are saying that this will jump to at least 442.5 billion naira from to 1.5 trillion naira in a year if the price floor of calls is raised by the operators from 6 naira 4 kobo to 8 naira 95 kobo. But what exactly do you see playing out here, considering the fact that it's looking like there might be some increase in tariff in the coming days? Let me start with you, Dr. Keke Ebenezers.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Like I always say, economically speaking, the primary goal of any business is to maximize profits. And the primary goal of any government is to maximize welfare. And when government is trying to maximize welfare, there must be what we call Pareto optimality, where one person is better off and the other person is not worse off. So I said that to say that as much as the businesses have realized, the telcos, they realized that there is a 40% increase in cost of operation. It has to come from the business because they can't bring that from their pocket. And then the people that are, using the service, you and I, the question now is that the burden will fall on us. So it becomes the duty of the government to ensure that the welfareism of the people that are using the services are protected, while the telcos are also not running at loss.
All right.
So, you know,
okay, let me quickly get the thoughts of Mr. Akinfatuke before we wrap up, considering the fact that these telcos are saying that the cost of the price hike in the price of diesel is causing some form of tariff hike, and they might have to increase in the coming days. Mr. Akinfatuke, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, very, very, very quickly. Again, when fundamentals are not adding up, it will naturally be exactly what we are saying. Again, if we had 173.56 billion minutes, of talk time in 2021, and that is increasing, we should be increasing. All things being equal, if cost of diesel, which just spoke about it, component of that is about 30% of the 40% of cost of doing business. Their generators are being stolen, are being damaged. There are certain areas they cannot get into. They will naturally want to pass it on to, the final consumer. But I always ask this question: at what costs?
All right.
If you made such horrendous amount of money over time, can we begin to now look at NCC now wielding the big stick? We had call down rates. It may not be their fault, it may be their fault. At any point in time, it is usury.
Mr. Fatida, we have to wrap it up. We have to wrap it up. Thank you.
They can increase, but with a human face.
Okay, with a human face. That's a fine place to live it. Thank you so much, Mr. Akinfatuke, for your thoughts on the show this morning. And also a very big thank you to you, Dr. Keke Ebenezers. Thank you for being on Business Breakfast.
Thank
you very much.
All right, still to come after the break, Lagos State, the commercial hub of Nigeria, ranks second most unlivable city in the world and worst in Africa, and 171 positions out of 172 countries. That's our next talking point on the show. Please stay with us.